An old woman walked into a bank wearing old, simple clothes. The manager looked her up and down and rolled his eyes. What happened the next day left the entire bank in shock. It was a Tuesday morning when Mrs. Eleanor Brooks pushed open the glass doors of Federal Central Bank in downtown Manhattan. Her steps were slow but steady. Her old brown shoes scuffed at the toe. She wore a faded gray sweater over a loose blue blouse, and her long gray hair was loosely tied back with a worn elastic band. She carried a cloth handbag that looked older than the lobby itself. The security guard barely looked up. The receptionist gave her a glance and immediately shifted her tone. "Yes," she said, with a tired voice. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, I just need to speak to someone about my account," Eleanor said politely. The receptionist sighed and tapped her keyboard half-heartedly. "Customer service is to your left. Second desk. Someone will be with you eventually." Eleanor nodded with a gentle smile and made her way to the waiting chairs. She didn't seem to notice the stares from other customers or the glances from the bank staff behind the glass partitions. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. Finally, a young man in a crisp suit, his tie perfectly centered and his hair slicked back, stepped into the customer area. His name tag read Jeremy Senior Account Manager. He glanced around and locked eyes with Eleanor. "You're Mrs. Brooks?" he asked, puzzled. "Yes," she said. He hesitated. "You don't look like I mean please. This way." Eleanor followed him to the desk. He didn't offer a chair. "So what can we help you with today?" She remained calm. "I just wanted to check the status of my account and ask a few questions about long-term savings options." Jeremy stared at her for a second, clearly unimpressed. "Well, most of our premium financial services are reserved for high-value clients. For basic savings, everything can be done online or at the ATM. I prefer speaking to someone in person," she said kindly. "I've always managed my finances that way." Jeremy smirked. "Of course. Well, let me just pull up your file." He tapped at his keyboard, not bothering to hide the disinterest in his voice. After a moment, his screen blinked. His brow furrowed. He stared for a second longer than he should have. "Is something wrong?" Eleanor asked. "No," he said quickly, regaining composure. Everything looks fine." But something had changed in his posture. He sat up straighter. His tone adjusted slightly. Eleanor noticed but said nothing. "Okay, so Mrs. Brooks, did you want to deposit or withdraw today?" "Neither," she said. "I just had a few questions. Would it be possible to schedule an appointment with a senior advisor?" Jeremy paused. "Honestly, Mom, we're quite booked. It might be a week or two before." He stopped when she reached into her cloth bag and took out a business card. She slid it across the desk. The card was gold embossed. The name on it, Eleanor M., Brooks founder, Brooks Furnishing and Interiors, Est. 1978. Jeremy stared at it. He looked back at her. "Wait, this is—" Eleanor nodded. "That was my company. I retired a few years ago." There was silence. Jeremy cleared his throat. "To see. Well, I'm sure we can find someone for you sooner. Let me check." She smiled gently. "That's all right. He'll come back tomorrow. It's not urgent." He nodded, now visibly nervous. "Yes, of course. Thank you for coming in." She stood slowly, picked up her bag, and walked toward the exit. As she passed the reception desk, the same receptionist from earlier pretended not to see her. Outside, the autumn wind picked up. Eleanor paused on the sidewalk. She looked up at the glass tower of the bank, then down at her shoes. She had been coming to that bank for over 20 years. They had never looked at her twice. She took a deep breath, stepped off the curb, and disappeared into the crowd. The next morning, she returned. This time, she wasn't wearing her old sweater. She stepped out of a black town car with tinted windows, assisted by a driver in uniform. Her navy blue suit fit perfectly, her hair neatly styled and pinned, pearls around her neck, a leather handbag instead of cloth, black heels that clicked across the marble floor. The same receptionist stood behind the desk, eyes wide. "Good morning." "Mom," she stammered. "Is Mr. Jeremy available?" Eleanor asked, her voice soft but firm. "Yes, of course, please. Right, this way." Before Eleanor could even sit down, the branch manager himself emerged from an office down the hall. He hurried forward with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Mrs. Brooks, we didn't know you'd be visiting today. It's truly an honor." Eleanor extended her hand calmly. "I'd like to close my account." The manager blinked. "I'm sorry. I'd like to close all my accounts today." Jeremy appeared at the door, pale. "Is something wrong, Mrs. Brooks?" he asked quickly. "No," she said. "I simply prefer to bank where I'm treated with respect, no matter what I'm wearing." The room fell quiet. The manager began to stammer. "But Mrs. Brooks, we value you as a client. I know exactly how much you value me," she said, reaching into her bag and placing her checkbook on the desk. "I would like the full amount transferred to my private institution account by this afternoon." The manager looked down at the number. His eyes widened. 8 figures. He swallowed hard. Well, handle it immediately." "Thank you." She turned and walked away. The sound of her heels echoed across the polished marble like a drumbeat of dignity. No one laughed this time. The sun was still rising when Eleanor arrived home that morning. Her town car pulled quietly into the circular driveway, and she stepped out without needing assistance. Inside, her house was calm and warm. Hardwood floors, built-in bookshelves, the faint scent of cinnamon from a candle she had left burning the day before. She hung up her jacket, removed her shoes, and walked into the study. She sat at the same mahogany desk where, for decades, she had run Brooks Furnishing and Interiors. The company was now under new leadership. Her granddaughter Olivia had taken over after earning her MBA. Eleanor opened her laptop. 3 emails were already waiting. One was from her financial advisor. The second, from the private wealth team at a boutique investment firm. The third, from a board member at the bank she had just walked out of. She ignored them all for now. Instead, she opened a folder labeled Legacy. Inside were detailed records of every account she had ever held, including the one at Federal Central Bank. That particular account had remained untouched for years, save for the quarterly interest that was automatically reinvested. It wasn't the only account she had, not even the largest, but it was the first account she had ever opened back when she was 23, just after her husband returned from the Army and they were saving to open their first furniture store. It held memories and dignity, but yesterday, they had treated her like a burden. She clicked on a document, a prepared transfer authorization. Her attorney had drafted it the night before. All she had to do was sign and send it to the new bank. She read it over slowly. $12,632,000. The result of 5 decades of hard work, discipline, and quiet investment. No one at the bank had asked about it. No one had cared. Until it was too late. She signed the form, scanned it, and sent it. It was done. By noon, the transaction had cleared. At 2 p.m., her phone rang. She let it go to voicemail. Then it rang again. And again. She finally picked up on the 4th try. "Mrs. Brooks, this is Henry Lawson, Regional Director at Federal Central. I'm terribly sorry to call unannounced, but I was informed you closed your accounts with us this morning." "And I..." "Yes," she said. I just wanted to express how truly sorry we are for the way you were treated. It doesn't reflect our values. I assure you, we're investigating the matter internally. I appreciate your call," Eleanor said calmly. There was a pause. "Would you be open to discussing a possible way to earn back your trust?" he asked. "No," she said. I understand. If there's anything, there is one thing." She interrupted. "Teach your staff that wealth doesn't always wear a suit." And with that, she ended the call. The next morning, headlines began to circulate across the regional banking world. Millionaire widow closes accounts after being disrespected by bank staff. Customer service gone wrong. One woman's quiet protest sends strong message. Legacy client leaves Federal Central over dress-based discrimination. The story made its way onto LinkedIn, Twitter, and even a few finance blogs. No one knew Eleanor had leaked it because she hadn't. But someone in the bank had spoken, quietly, anonymously. Likely someone who had seen the transaction firsthand and realized exactly who they had turned away. Eleanor sat on her porch that evening, tea in hand, watching the headlines scroll across her tablet. She didn't smile. She didn't feel triumphant. She felt tired. Not physically, but in the soul. How many people had they treated this way? How many others had walked in without polish or pretense, hoping to be treated like human beings, only to be dismissed? She closed the tablet. She had never wanted attention, but perhaps, just this once, a little noise was necessary. The following Monday, her granddaughter Olivia came by for dinner. "I saw the articles," she said. "You know you're kind of a legend now." Eleanor chuckled softly. "I wasn't trying to be." "I know," Olivia said. "That's what makes it powerful." They ate quietly, enjoying roasted chicken and green beans from the garden. After dinner, Olivia hesitated. "Grandma, may I ask you something?" "Of course." "That account. Why did you never move it earlier?" Eleanor looked down at her teacup. "Because that bank was the first one that ever gave me a loan. Your grandfather and I walked in, nervous and young, and they treated us kindly back then. They gave us $500, which was everything at the time. We started the whole business with that." She looked up. "But people change. And sometimes, so do places." Olivia nodded, understanding more than she could say. "So what now?" "Now," Eleanor smiled faintly. "Now I go back to living my quiet life. Except maybe ill-bake a bit more. And perhaps remind a few others gently that decency costs nothing." Later that night, Eleanor received a handwritten letter by courier. It was from the CEO of Federal Central Bank. The envelope was thick, the paper expensive. The contents were full of apologies, acknowledgments, and invitations for meetings. She folded it once and slid it into her fireplace. The flames rose silently, and Eleanor Brooks leaned back in her chair, listening to the quiet crackle of wood and the faraway sounds of the world, finally learning what dignity looks like when it speaks softly and walks away. Wednesday morning at Federal Central Bank began with an emergency meeting. The glass conference room on the 14th floor was filled with pale faces, tense fingers tapping pens against expensive portfolios, and more cups of black coffee than usual. The regional director, Henry Lawson, stood at the head of the table, flipping through printed screenshots of news articles. Across from him sat several senior executives, their shoulders hunched. "This isn't just a PR issue," Henry said, voice low but sharp. "We lost one of our largest legacy clients, and now we're losing control of the narrative." The head of customer relations cleared his throat. "She didn't go to the press. We've confirmed that. Someone internally must have leaked the transaction." "That's not the point," Henry snapped. "The point is that the entire city is talking about how we treated a long-standing client like a second-class citizen because of how she looked. The compliance officer leaned forward. If regulators see this as a pattern of discrimination, it's not a pattern. The HR director interrupted. Everyone turned. She hesitated. Well, maybe it is. Not written, but real. No one spoke. Henry exhaled, rubbing his forehead. Where's Jeremy? On leave, someone muttered. No, Henry said. Get him in here. Jeremy arrived 20 minutes later. Tie crooked, eyes sunken. He looked like he hadn't slept. Tu didn't know who she was, he said immediately. Before anyone even asked. She came in wearing, I thought she was just... He trailed off. Henry leaned forward. You thought she didn't matter. Jeremy said nothing. Let me be clear, Henry continued. You didn't just lose us a client. You may have started a collapse in our trust reputation that we won't recover from. Do you understand that? Jeremy nodded slowly. She wasn't angry, he said quietly. She never even raised her voice. That's the problem, Henry said. The quiet ones are the ones who mean it. By noon, 2 other long-term clients had called to schedule meetings to review their portfolios. One had already moved half his assets to a competitor. The other requested a complete withdrawal unless a formal apology was made to Mrs. Brooks publicly. That afternoon, a reporter from a national financial magazine contacted the corporate office, requesting a quote. The headline they were working on: What does customer service look like after you're worth $12 million? No one returned the call. Instead, damage control emails were drafted. Legal reviewed every sentence. The PR team proposed a statement for the bank's social media. We are reviewing recent events to ensure that every client, no matter their background or appearance, is treated with the respect they deserve. The CEO rejected it. Too vague. Too little. Too late. That evening, in a quiet neighborhood 20 miles away, Eleanor Brooks watered her garden as the sun dipped below the horizon. Her phone buzzed, but she didn't answer. She was tending to her tomatoes, humming an old hymn. Inside, Olivia sat at the kitchen table, reading another headline aloud. They're calling it the Eleanor effect, she said with a smirk. Banking execs now getting training on visual bias and legacy client humility. Eleanor smiled. Good, she said. Maybe next time, someone will think twice before assuming they know everything about a person based on their shoes. Olivia looked at her, admiration in her eyes. Grandma, do you feel guilty about how much attention this is getting? Eleanor shook her head gently. I didn't set out to embarrass anyone, but if a little embarrassment leads to change, I can live with that. The next morning, Eleanor received a package. Inside was a formal letter, framed in silver, with an embossed seal from Federal Central Bank. It contained a carefully crafted apology signed by every member of the regional board. A second note, handwritten, lay beneath it. You were right. Wealth isn't always worn. We're ashamed it took losing you to remember that. Henry Lawson. She placed the frame in a drawer. She didn't need reminders. But the lesson, that could stay. Across town, the CEO of Federal Central was facing questions from investors. The bank's stock had dipped 3%. Small, but noticeable. You're losing trust, one board member said, and trust is everything in banking. The CEO nodded solemnly. What's the plan to fix it? Another asked. He looked out the window. We stop pretending perception equals reality. We listen more. We train better. And we remember the next Eleanor Brooks could walk through that door any day. On Friday, Eleanor received a visit. It was the young receptionist from the bank. Out of uniform, holding a small box wrapped in brown paper. Am sorry to show up unannounced, the girl said. Nervous, Eleanor invited her in. They sat in the sunroom, sipping tea. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry, the girl said, eyes wet. You were nothing but kind. And I treated you like a problem. I don't want to be that kind of person." Eleanor listened without interrupting. After a long pause, she said, "The way we treat people, we don't need shows who we really are." The girl nodded slowly. "I know that now." Eleanor smiled gently. "Good. Then don't be too hard on yourself. Learn, grow, and treat the next person better." The girl left with tears in her eyes and a strange weight lifted from her shoulders. That night, Eleanor sat by the fireplace with a book in her lap. She hadn't asked for justice. She hadn't asked for attention. She had simply asked to be treated like a person. And in doing so, she reminded the world of something it had almost forgotten. That kindness is not a luxury. It is the currency of dignity. And no account, no matter how large or small, should ever come at the cost of simple respect. The Monday after the incident was different. Across the banking world, Eleanor's story continued to ripple through conference calls, training sessions, and private boardrooms. What had begun as a minor headline had now evolved into a quiet, potent symbol. They were calling it the dignity deficit. Business podcasts picked up the story. Customer service panels were suddenly quoting her. Financial advisors used the situation as a case study. At one retail banking conference in Chicago, a keynote speaker opened with, "In an era of automation, it's easy to forget that the human element still matters, especially when it walks through the door in worn shoes and a quiet voice." At Federal Central Bank, things weren't just awkward now. They were tense. Every interaction between staff and customers was monitored more closely. A new internal memo outlined sensitivity expectations for frontline employees. Branch managers were instructed to undergo a crash course in legacy client recognition. In training rooms across the region, Eleanor's story was turned into a mandatory video presentation. It began with a soft voice reading headlines. "Bank loses 12-year client after visual judgment incident." "Respect isn't about appearance, it's about presence." Would you have seen her? The video ended with a single sentence on screen. How many of our clients walk in looking like Eleanor Brooks? And how many walk out for good? For the first time in a long time. The staff sat in silence, not out of fear, but reflection. And it's the one, and it's you. At one particular branch, the assistant manager sat quietly after the video ended. Her name was Fiona. She was new, had joined just a few weeks before Eleanor's visit. She hadn't been present during the original incident, but she'd read the full report, seen the footage, and heard the murmurs from everyone around her. She looked around the room. No one spoke, and then she raised her hand. "I think we should go meet her," she said. The room blinked. "Why?" someone asked. "Because if we're going to use her story to train, the least we can do is say thank you in person." No one disagreed. And it's so neat. That Friday, Fiona, along with 2 other staff members, drove to Eleanor's home with a bouquet of flowers and a handwritten letter signed by 48 employees across 7 branches. They knocked. Nervous, Eleanor answered the door herself, wearing her old sweater and slippers. Her eyes moved over their faces. She said nothing, but stepped aside to let them in. They sat at her kitchen table, fumbling through their words, unsure of how to express what they had come for. Fiona finally said, "We didn't come to apologize on behalf of the bank. That's already been done in memos and PR statements. We came because we wanted to learn." Eleanor looked at them for a moment, then poured 4 cups of tea. She sat, and she began to talk, not about money, but about dignity. She told them about her first loan, the way she and her husband had walked into the original branch wearing homemade suits and shaking hands. She told them how a banker, a man named Mr. Hendricks, had looked them in the eye and asked about their dream, not their income. She talked about how, year after year, She never left the bank even when others offered better interest rates. Because trust was rare, and she explained why last Tuesday hurt more than they could imagine. It wasn't the wait, she said. It wasn't the way he spoke to me. It was the moment he looked at me like I had nothing to offer, like I wasn't worth his time. That is something no bank account can fix. No one interrupted her. No one even sipped their tea. They just listened. Truly listened. Das är det very. When they left, Fiona handed her the letter and said quietly, "Thank you for reminding us what real service means." Eleanor simply nodded. The following week, the story reached a national audience. A journalist from a respected public radio program called and requested an interview. Eleanor declined. "I've said what I needed to say by walking away." But the journalist persisted, not for a media spectacle, but to share the story in a way that honored its heart. Eventually, Eleanor agreed on one condition: no names, no headlines, just the lesson. And so, one morning, her voice went live across airwaves, gentle and sure, telling a story that began not with money, but with respect. Das är en vacation. That same morning, across dozens of cities, bank tellers greeted customers a little differently. They made eye contact. They asked questions with genuine tone. They remembered, sometimes, the most important clients aren't the loudest, richest, or flashiest. They're the quiet ones. The ones who wait patiently. The ones who never demand but remember everything. At Federal Central Bank's headquarters, the CEO reviewed a quarterly report. Client attrition was slowing. Satisfaction surveys were climbing. A small but consistent trend was forming. People who had once silently left were beginning to return. He sat back in his chair. It wasn't just about fixing a scandal anymore. It was about rebuilding a culture. Inside, back at her home, Eleanor sat at her desk writing a letter not to the bank, not to the press, but to her granddaughter. She wrote about why she had chosen to live simply, why she never flashed her wealth, why she believed kindness was more powerful when it was expected. She ended the letter with one line: "How you treat the quiet ones says everything about who you are when the world isn't watching." She sealed the envelope and placed it in a wooden box with other letters, labeled, "For Olivia. Someday." Then she returned to her chair, picked up her book, and let the late afternoon light pour across the pages as soft, steady, and unshakable as her own quiet legacy. Spring arrived gently in Eleanor's neighborhood. The cherry trees bloomed in soft pinks and whites, lining the sidewalks like brushstrokes on a quiet canvas. Life, in its usual way, returned to its rhythms at the bank. New faces replaced old ones. A few resignations had come quietly. Some retirements had been expedited. But the biggest change wasn't in personnel, it was in posture. People sat up straighter now when clients entered. They asked questions with sincerity. They stopped assuming. They had learned, as one new teller put it, that every person walking through that door might carry a story worth more than their balance. At headquarters, the CEO finally signed off on a new internal initiative. The Brooks Principle, a client-first philosophy named unofficially but unanimously by staff across the company. No marketing, no press releases, just a silent vow to never judge a client by their shoes, their accent, or the time they chose to walk in. Here's odd sudden death. Eleanor knew none of this. She didn't care for awards or programs named after her. She had asked for no recognition. She spent her mornings tending to her herbs, her afternoons reading on the porch, and her evenings baking or writing letters. Occasionally, she received notes from strangers handwritten, typed, even painted. One was from a teller in Ohio. "Because of you." I asked a woman yesterday how her day was going, and she cried. No one had asked her that in weeks. Another, from a small-town bank manager. I didn't realize how many people I looked past until I heard your story. You helped me see again. Eleanor read each note carefully, then placed it in a wooden box labeled kindness. She didn't respond to them. She didn't need to. The responses were already happening in the world beyond her fence. One Saturday afternoon, Olivia visited again. She brought scones and stories as usual and a new question. "Grandma," she asked, "do you ever wish you had told them off? Really let them have it?" Eleanor smiled, slicing strawberries for the tart. "No," she said. "Words spoken in anger are remembered only for their sting. But silence when spoken with purpose echoes louder than shouting ever will." Olivia leaned back in her chair. "Do you think they'll forget?" They might," Eleanor replied. "But the ones who needed the lesson most, they won't. And that's enough." The following week, a podcast host from a leadership series reached out. He didn't ask to interview her. He asked permission to retell her story as a fable for leadership retreats and ethics classes. She agreed, but on one condition. "Don't name me," she wrote. "Name the lesson." And so, in company retreats and university classrooms, the story was told. An old woman walked into a bank. She was judged by her clothes. She left quietly, and with her went millions. But what she took wasn't just money. It was a mirror held up to every assumption we make when we think we already know someone. Months passed. The air warmed. New stories replaced old headlines. But here and there, when someone walked into a bank wearing old shoes and a quiet voice, a few sharp eyes looked up not with judgment, but with attention, and if they were lucky, they were served by someone who had heard of the woman who wore humility like armor and walked away without raising her voice but shook an entire institution with her silence. Eleanor continued to live quietly. No interviews, no spotlight, just tea, books, and handwritten notes. She was, in every way, herself, unchanged. One morning, she sat under the garden trellis, a pen in hand, writing one final letter to Olivia, one not for now, but for a future moment when it would matter most. She wrote, "Wealth is not what sits in your account. It's how you carry yourself when no one is watching. It's how you treat those who can offer you nothing. It's the courage to walk away when you're not respected and the grace not to gloat when you're proven right." She signed it gently. "With love, always, Grandma." She folded the letter, placed it in the legacy folder, and tucked it into the wooden box beside all the others. Then she stood, steady, still strong, because dignity, once claimed, never needs to shout. As the sun dipped below the horizon and the wind rustled the garden leaves, a lesson lingered in the air, quiet but unshakable. You can measure a person by their clothes, but you can measure a business by how it treats the quiet ones. And that is the final lesson.